Hi, I'm Wes, the Explosion, and Mega Man Dr. Wily's Revenge was actually the first portable game I ever owned. I got it alongside a silver Gameboy Pocket, while my brother received a purplish, transparent model with Bugs Bunny Crazy Castle. Nothing against the Looney Tunes, but I think I got the better deal. Never managed to beat the game though, me just not having the motor skills way back when, and I think when I eventually revisited it, I only managed to get to the first fortress stage. No, despite my long history with this one, it wasn't until the 3DS port that I finally managed to clear, which felt pretty good. But what about the game itself? Is it good, hard or easy, or just a shadow of the NES titles? After giving it another look recently, I'm ready to tell you exactly that. Dr. Wily is up to it again, trying to take over the world with 4 of Dr. Light's robots and 4 of his own, so Mega Man sets out to beat him up. Wily has an ace up his sleeve, however. He's created a robot, designated Mega Man Killer number 001, NCAR, specifically to take down Mega Man. Oh no! And that's pretty much it. While the classic series tends to be pretty light in the story department, this one is even more so. Wily's being evil, so stop him. And hey, that's fine. I just felt a little awkward when someone in chat asked me about the plot and I didn't have anything to mention. I didn't forget, there wasn't anything. The only thing really worth noting is the introduction of the Mega Man Killer line, and Wily having his own space colony, both of which are neat. You jump, and you shoot. This game pulls largely from the first 2 NES titles, containing 4 bosses from each, so your capabilities are pretty limited to reflect that. I almost feel like I could end this section here, the game's really not giving me much to talk about. Oh, there's a password system with the grid and dots and for power-ups. Enemies can drop large and small health refills, large and small ammo refills, and extra lives. Wow. As for the weapons, they function pretty much how they did previously. Rolling Cutters boomerang, Ice Arrows freeze, Firestorm shoots out a wave of flame and also spins around you, Thunderbeam hits in front, above, and below. Then Bubble Lead creeps along the ground, Time Stopper stops time, Quick Boomerangs go around and back, and Atomic Fire can be charged and also break a few blocks. The charge is still awkward to use though, it's still being finicky with whether you're holding down the button correctly or not. It also strikes me as weird that they put in both fire weapons and both boomerangs from the first 2 games. Heck, given that ice is just frozen water, you could link up those with the bubbles as well, making it almost feel like the developer went out of their way to make the 2 sets of weapons feel as redundant as possible. Oh well, I like boomerangs, so I guess it works. But hey, that's not all you get. There's an item called Carry after you beat the 4 main stages that pops a platform underneath Rock when he's in the air, though if you're standing, it goes in front instead. You can only have one out at once, its energy ticks down while it's out, and you can only cancel it by walking off screen. You just need to wait for it to time out otherwise. Though I think you could chain them with good timing. Pretty simple support item, but it's helpful so no complaints. NCAR also doesn't leave you empty-handed. Defeating him grants you the Mirror Buster. Hold out a shield in front of you that reflects projectiles. While its use is kind of limited, since most enemies just crash into you, it's helpful against Sniper Joes, the final boss, and a few other oddballs. Okay, now I can end this section. You get 6 whole stages in this one, the standard any order ones being for Cut, Ice, Elec, and Fireman. Some of these borrow pretty heavily from their NES iterations, Elec's having electric beams and disappearing blocks, though it also throws in some fans, because the timing on this stuff wasn't tricky enough. Fireman has the flame pillars and fire pits, as well as the enemies that huck the fireballs from Mega Man 2. Iceman's stage is slippery, but also includes some blocks that melt as you stand on them, and some icicles that fall from the ceiling that you need to avoid getting hit by, but also use for extra jump height. Cutman's is pretty new, having floors that move you forward or backwards, with enemies that fall from the ceiling as you get close and roll your way. Or maybe that's just Metal Man's. But there's also some cutters that open up and circle around when you get close. The stages aren't horrible. They keep the staples but manage to change things up a little bit, rather than just cutting and pasting. I will say that they do seem to drag on a bit longer than normal, but with there only being 4 of them, I guess they wanted to give you your money's worth. I'll also say that there is some nasty enemy placement, such as ones you're likely to jump into your first time in a stage, since they're just off screen when you need to be aware of them. Some of those cutters and wheels feel a bit too close together to be able to reliably dodge, and if they hit you on the moving platforms, you'll likely fall to your death before you recover. And why do the wheels take so many hits anyway? Plus, Big Eyes are back, which I still consider possibly the worst stage enemy in the series. But still, while the stages are a bit trickier than normal, you can have some fun with them, so I'll stick with my rating of not horrible. At least until you get to endgame. I won't mince words, the last 2 stages are horrendous. All the issues I mentioned are present, but more often and extreme. Them even doing the classic Wily stage 1, 3 big eyes in a row thing. There's plenty of enemies that you just drop down right in front of and immediately have to deal with. The final stage even starting you off with a Sniper Joe that's just off screen, enough that you can't see him, but he can shoot you. There's the Metal Man Pinecone hallway that not only takes a long time to get through, especially the second one with how narrow it is, but also seemed to give the game a bit of trouble when I used Rolling Cutter on all those enemies. If the hardware can't take it, maybe you don't throw so much on screen at once. On top of that, there's a ton of spots with really cheap deaths. You jumping down and landing in spikes on the next screen, or sections of disappearing blocks where you can't see the full pattern in advance. And on top of all that, each is exceedingly long, even more so than the previous areas. While all the insta-kills and other bullcrap I mentioned certainly do their part to make them seem longer, with all the progress you'll lose upon death, combined with the need to stretch some of your weapon ammo out, I'd still say that even if you managed to dance through these perfectly, it'd still feel like they were really dragging. Anyway, at the end of the first Wily Fortress, you get the boss rush, though rather than rematches, you fight 4 new for this playthrough, enemies, Quick, Bubble, Flash, and Heat Man. Beat them and earn their weapon as you head back through the teleporter, which is certainly a unique experience. Won't have many chances to use them this late in the game, so make sure you break them out whenever it feels appropriate. Except for maybe the fire weapons, since that'll be helpful for the final boss. And after them, you face Endcard before moving on to the final stage. So yeah, you get some decent levels in the main game, and 2 horrible ones per end. Seriously, I'd straight up call both fortresses bad level design. It took me about an hour to beat the game with save states, but it probably would have taken me more like 3 without, so maybe this was their way of padding the runtime. To review, the bosses for the standard stages are Cutman, Iceman, Electman, and Fireman, and the ones for the boss rush are Quickman, Flashman, Bubbleman, and Heatman. And as you might figure, they fight pretty much exactly like they did on the NES, but in a much smaller space, and oh boy, you really feel the crunch. It can be really hard to find enough room to dodge, and running under guys like Cutman who jump around can be nigh impossible in some situations. Getting just that one weapon and then exploiting the weakness chain to end things quick is even more important than usual, since you don't really have room to dance circles around them, and you being in so close quarters also means you have less time to react to some of their attacks. There's also a few extra things to consider. Due to the smaller weakness circles, some of them have been tweaked, like Cutman being weak to Firestorm and Flashman to Ice Arrow. Because game balance, I guess. Then there's also how you get weapons from the boss rush. Normally you can just choose what order you fight Robot Masters in, and when you get to this part of the game, even if you don't know who you're about to fight, since you already beat everyone once, you're guaranteed to have the right weapon. Not so here though, since you can easily pop into Quickman's capsule before taking down Flashman. I'd normally find this pretty neat, since you either need to just deal with each as they come, or scout things out first, but given how long the stage before this drags on and the whole tiny screen thing, this can actually be pretty cruel. Better pray for good luck, or hope you have access to save states. Then there's the new boss Endcard. He moves from one side of the screen to the other, either by jumping, dashing, or jumping, then dashing. He blocks while dashing, but you can hit him while he's in the air. When he gets to his destination, he'll hold up his spear and absorb buster shots you send his way. Unlike when you use the mirror buster though, he still takes damage, and the more you hit him, the bigger his reflected shots will be. It's pretty easy to dodge though, so go for damage over safety. This is another fight where a bigger screen would be nice, and he can certainly give me some trouble. The strat is to keep as much distance between you as you can, so that you have more time to react to how he's going to swap sides, and to light him up when he's asking for it. Then of course there's Wily. He sits atop a giant metal head that, for phase 1, continuously spits out these razor wheel enemies. The first goes across the floor, after that he fires one high, then one low. They can be a little tricky to avoid, even when you know the pattern, but it's not impossible. It's also weak to atomic fire, which I still have trouble using, though someone in chat recommended Firestorm as an alternative. While not doing as much as a fully charged atomic fire, it still did enough, so I just got up in its face, spammed the attack, and prayed that I did damage faster. Though on my follow-up playthrough, I did a bit better getting around the wheels. The second form is pretty much a gimme, if you know what you're doing. It has a gun that will fire a laser, alternating between low and high, and also has a claw that will zone in on you. All you need to do is keep the mirror buster active in front of you to reflect the shots and avoid the claw, which you can do by standing somewhere between the boss and the edge of the screen, and retreating when it starts to move. If you're in a hurry, you can jump to reflect the high shots, otherwise, you can just wait for the floor level ones, and probably no damage the guy. Overall, it's a lot of recycling, and the two Wily forms are annoying, then underwhelming, but Enkar at least manages to be a pretty cool fight. Really hope we get to see him again in like 20 years or something. The visuals are pretty much the same as on the NES, but grayscale and smaller. The stages also have less detail to them, and while a few have some neat backgrounds like an icy mountain or window into space, there's even more that just feel like kind of random patterns, drawn to look vaguely industrial or sci-fi. These are the floors of the future. Not that it matters too much, since with screen size, these weren't exactly meant to be stared at too closely. It doesn't look horrible, and I'm kinda surprised that some of the sprites aren't more dumbed down. And I think the image of Mega Man missing half his skin for the weapon get screen is pretty cool. And while it's a little dull looking at the black and white, you can also pop the cartridge into a Game Boy Color or Super Game Boy to give it a simple color filter. Though not around here, we go for authenticity. The sound isn't so bad. The tracks for the main stages have been remixed to work on the smaller console, and while I might just be a sucker for Mega Man music and retro soundtracks, I actually really like the way they sound. It doesn't really seem like a downgrade from the originals, at least to my ears. The new tracks are also pretty decent, like the intro and boss music, and it's kinda funny to me how much of a downer the password screen track is. The real standout is the music for the first Wily stage, which was later brought back for Heart of Enkar in 10. I think it sounds great and like it belongs in the series, with an extra feeling of determination thrown in that's appropriate for endgame. The ending theme sounds a little off somehow, making it hard to listen to, but overall, it's a fun little OST. The sound effects are also cute. You giving out little plonks as you shoot, weird little blips as you land on a surface, and the razor wheel enemies rev up with an odd sound that might grate on some, but I kinda like. I'd rank this one as harder than most of the NES titles, maybe even all of them. I'd whine about some of the level design and hardware limitations here, while others might complain about devils, security lasers, and boobing there. But still, I'd say this one's a little rougher than usual. There's the longer levels with the crappy enemy placement and cheap deaths, the smaller boss rooms with little space to dodge, and you also don't move quite as smoothly as you do on the NES. Granted, that's probably because if you did, you'd be moving across the tiny screen too quickly, but even if it was by design, it's worth pointing out. It can also feel like the game's a little generous with what you get hit with, you know, in its favor, but maybe I'm just bad at reading hitboxes. If you're playing this in a way where you can create save states, it clears up a lot of the frustration, but if you're on original hardware, this is gonna be rough. It's also got the Mega Man 9 thing going on where, while it feels really cheap your first time through, familiarizing yourself with the game can go a long way. While I really have used save states my first run, on my second, I made a few, but only wound up using them against Enkar, because I really didn't want to redo the stage, and Wily, because I really didn't want to run out of weapon ammo, and for that second example, I probably could have gotten away with not. Upon my revisit, I knew where all the nasty bits were, had better strategies for when to make use of my weapons, and just had a better handle on the game in general. Still, the first playthrough will be tough, so be prepared for that, and while subsequent ones will be a lot more manageable, I still wouldn't say the game is a cakewalk. If you have the tools to turn back time, I definitely recommend using them. For everyone else, strap in. Or watch a playthrough and memorize everything. Dr. Wily's Revenge is something I'd only recommend to fans of the Blue Bomber. The levels are remixed enough rather than just copy-pasted, the boss rush has an interesting twist to it, and Enkar's just pretty darn cool, so that there's enough new here that it's worth playing. New relative to the NES anyway. This game is over 30 years old. Longtime fans are also more likely to have the skills and patience to carry them through the experience. If you played the mainline classic games into the ground, you might even get some fun out of experiencing a game over again. Newer, more casual players should probably avoid it though. It doesn't play quite as nicely and looks a lot duller. Plus, the levels come across as endurance tests, with a lot of sections feeling unfair, which could make this game a huge turnoff. I could even see it causing someone to drop the series if they came across this one too early. Plus, while I wouldn't condemn the game as bad and it can be pretty fun, it still isn't nearly as good as the mainline games. unless you're pretty heavily invested, seeking this one out isn't nearly as appealing as just loading up one of the Legacy collections again. For this one, you kinda just gotta gauge your own interest. It was worth picking up for me at the very least. But hey, what about you? Have you played this one? If so, what did you think? And if not, would you be interested in another collection for the Game Boy entries? At one point, that was actually supposed to be a thing. That'll do it for this week, so thanks as always for watching, and maybe consider subscribing if you're into platformers, especially Mega Man. For everlasting peace.